So here we're looking at the possibility of using XML authoring tools. This is already being done to a certain extent in the Parliament and the two committees, the European Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions. We're already working on having amendments to legislation or to opinions on legislation being put in electronically in quite a rigid form. Basically, this allows us to make sure that when we have a text which has already been translated, we can really make sure we can bring most of that in and only give the translator a very small job to do in looking at the changes in particular. Why that's important is because these amendments come in very quickly and have very short deadlines. So it's something which is very important to us to make sure that this works. To a certain extent, it's also the case with website content, trying to reduce the sorts of text which are being used there to make sure that the translations can be produced quickly. There's a lot more scope in this area, and I suspect that this is one which may not grow in the next couple of years, but maybe in 4 or 5 years, we might start having systems which allow an author quite a degree of freedom, but are actually producing a very structured text. The big one, machine translation. There's been an exchange of information on tests that have been carried out at the Commission and the Parliament. The Commission is working on its EESC system. I'm not going to say any more because if I do, I'll steal Spiros's thunder, which I don't want to do. So you'll have to wait a few minutes before you find out more about that. An area which is relatively simplistic, conversion from PDF. Now, in this case, we have tools available which can pretty much convert typewritten text into a form where we can translate them using the tools such as PDF Converter, Nuance Omnipage, ABI. However, we're also interested in, is there any way we can take handwritten text and get it into a form where we can translate it? That may seem a bit odd, but if you think of the sort of large administrations which we represent, one of the things that needs to be translated are things like doctor's notes, which are coming in. You may have seen the doctor's handwriting. It's not very easy to deal with, and we don't really have any tools that can deal with that at the moment. But if in the future that becomes available, that's something that would be very interesting. The next one is workflow tools. This really does step aside from the language technology and takes us into a technology which allows us to work with language. Each of the institutions has a very different workflow, which is odd really because we're basically doing the same job. So these are systems which have developed in-house over many, many years, most of them based on originally paper systems. And what we're looking at now in several of the institutions is to move forward to the next generation. Our cooperation here is based on an exchange of information, learning what we're doing and what we're doing differently and why we're doing it differently. And what we want to look at next is how we can take the lessons that we've learned from our individual systems and bring them together to either build new systems ourselves or perhaps to look at several of the institutions working together on a common workflow tool. Electronic dictionaries, we're not developing electronic dictionaries, we're looking at how can we best deliver electronic dictionaries to our translators, and also which electronic dictionaries should we deliver. The European Parliament's done a lot of work on this in particular. If you imagine a translator in our environment is commonly working with several languages in the Parliament and the committees, they might be working with 6 or 7 languages. So having all the dictionaries and resources available for those languages is actually quite a difficult thing to manage across all the translators. So that's something we're looking at how we can improve. Another thing which is becoming important to us now is teleworking. Most of the institutions already have some degree of teleworking. Others are just starting, like my own. And we started here with a survey on the current state of play, which we've completed. We looked at the technologies being used, and we looked at the limitations that they produce. It's not only a question of can you deliver all the tools which are available in the office, but how well do they work one of the issues that we've seen is that we use a thin client, so that basically it's the screen and the keyboard which are with the translator and everything else is back at base, which under normal circumstances would be fine. However, one of the limitations of that system is that there's a slow update of the screen. Now, for most users, that wouldn't be a problem, but for translators, that's a real issue, because a lot of them are typing extremely quickly and reviewing what they've typed instantly, and so the system doesn't really deliver. So we need to have a look at how we can improve the situation there. For the proofing tools, for spelling and grammar, we've looked at the linguistic tools that are available in Microsoft Office 2007, 2010. Why? Because that's what we use. We haven't really looked further than that. But we're also interested in looking at how that can be used for the authors as well, not just for the translators. Terminology extraction, you may be aware of the project IATE, which is the term base available for the European institutions, which is also, for the most part, available publicly. We're also looking at ways that we can take the terminology which is within European documents and make that available for future translations. So we've looked at Xerox Term Finder, Terminix Synchroterm, STL Multi-Term Extract, Multicorpora, Multitrans, comparing these to see what are the advantages and disadvantages of each, to try and see which one will best suit our environment. And not only suit our environment, but where it should appear within the environment. And that's an overview of the areas that we're covering. So I just have one final slide, and really this is the one which I don't have the answers. I just have the questions. Where next? How do we best serve our new language combinations? We are looking at, Croatian may well come in soon. We're considering whether Icelandic will become an issue soon. Turkish. How do we integrate languages like that, new languages? Is there any way that we can more efficiently introduce Croatian, given that Croatian and Slovenia are quite similar languages? Could we apply such lessons to other languages such as Czech and Slovak? How do we cope with the constant increase in languages? At the moment, we're coping reasonably well with 23. Can we cope with 30? I think the answer is not the way we're working now. So we need to find new ways of working there. How do we manage multilingual source texts? Now, this is not a problem for most translators, but for those in the parliamentary assemblies, so in the parliament and in the committees, we very often get texts which are, for example, a text in English, where somebody has edited the text in French. So they take a sentence, they cross out a couple of words, they add a part in French, they cross out a different bit of the sentence. So you end up with quite a complex document. And with a document like that, current computer-aided translation tools just don't work. They don't even work when it's separate sentences, which are in different languages. But you put those sentences into a single language, and we just have to ignore the tools and do it by hand. How do we keep the translator's responsibility in a case where everything is being checked, especially when things are being checked by a computer? This is a problem, because we've been telling the translators, yes, you're a profession, you have professional responsibility. And then we're leading them by the hand and saying, we're going to check that all your numbers in your document are correct. We're going to check that all the dates in your document are correct using quality assurance tools. But at the same time, we can't allow the translators not to do that themselves. Because if they do, the tools won't always cope all the time. And we can get some very foolish and very embarrassing errors in documents because of that. Big question next. How to measure the impact of language technology on translation? And the real thing here is the financial impact. We spend a lot of money on language technology. We also spend a lot of money on translators. How do we measure that? We can measure the total amount, but we can't measure how much the technology is giving us. And finally, I'll just skip to the last question as I'm out of time. What's the role of the translator in the new technological environment? Are they still a translator? Are they simply a proofreader? this is the question our translators are asking now, and that's something which we really need to find an answer for them to keep them motivated. Okay, thank you very much.